Art and Culture course outline. First of all, before we start our discussion on art and culture, which has emerged as one of the very important sections, and also I would say trickier also, because despite a plethora of sources available in the market, art and culture remains to be one of the difficult, for many of the majority of the students, it remains to be one of the difficult areas in history segment. But despite this, there is also a consensus that without art and culture, you will find it difficult to crack GS paper 1 and also the 6 to 7 questions which come from this segment in your prelims examination. The purpose of recording this session is not to teach anything about art and culture, which we are going to cover in a comprehensive way in the coming videos, but to help you understand what art and culture of UPSC is about. What UPSC expects you to prepare and which are the important, I would say, milestones or the important chapters and how you should integrate your preparation of art and culture with ancient and medieval history. Before 2011, art and culture was not specifically mentioned in the syllabus. But from the time art and culture has been specifically added, we find that every year 7 to 8 questions come from this segment. Sometimes as independent questions or sometimes as derived questions from ancient or medieval history. Now let me be honest. You can never understand India truly without understanding its cultural heritage. In fact, even after your selection, all the successful candidates go on to Bharat Darshan. And the purpose of Bharat Darshan, an all India tour which is arranged by the government of India, is to help you correlate with whatever you have studied and also appreciate the value, the intrinsic value of Indian culture. It is said that Gandhiji, when he arrived in India on 9th January 1915, he was advised by Gopal Krishna Gokhale to undertake a all India tour so as to understand India better. And he did that. So similarly, not an all India tour for a yearly basis, but definitely for 2, sometimes 1 month, you are made to travel to different parts of India, which is not from the point of view of tourism, but to help acquaintance with our culture. Jawaharlal Nehru, in the book Discovery of India, writes that great civilizations and empires like the Egyptians, Mesopotamians, the Greeks, the Persians, they fell, but Indian culture stands intact, enriched, and only more beautified and diversified. So what is the reason for this? So to understand this basic thing, why India has survived despite being a diverse nation. Winston Churchill had professed that he had a prophecy that India will disintegrate after independence, but it has not happened. In fact, India remains the largest democracy in the world. If United States of America is the oldest, then India is the shining example of the most diverse, dynamic democracy in the world. To understand how democracy in India has not only survived, but it has actually enriched the value of democracy, it had actually proven the system right, which was something which was foresighted by our forefathers, the members of Constituent Assembly. To understand everything, we have to get into art and culture. Let me tell you first that art and culture is not about monuments, about the names of dances, about the various forms of music, musical instruments, or World Heritage Sites, but it is about understanding Indianness, the essence of what is known as Indianness, what India stands for through various art forms. How the study of ancient history, medieval history, and even modern history would be incomplete without understanding its cultural component. And when we will study culture, we will have to make a correlation between culture and society, culture and economy, and definitely culture and politics. Indian culture, culture means a way of life, and art is a form of expression of creativity manifested in various forms. So we have to understand art and culture not only from the point of view of art forms, tangible and intangible, but how the study of these art forms can help us in understanding or correlating the history of those times. The purpose of this course outline is broadly to help you understand how you should approach. The approach to prepare art and culture. Many a times I have seen that in the preparatory videos available online, whenever somebody talks about the strategy to prepare art and culture, they focus mainly on book sources or prominent websites or maybe some course. But I would be honest with you that preparing art and culture is about understanding the essence of Indian culture. So if you understand the essence of Indian culture and how it has evolved, the evolution component, then it becomes very easy to correlate it with the art forms. For example, we find that when there was decline of coinage, when there was political decentralization, the structure of art forms, temples also reduced. The degree of ornamentation also reduced. So we have to understand the philosophy of culture also. The philosophy of art forms. If you see the type of questions being asked in the recent times, then we find that the philosophy aspect is very much emphasized upon. So please do not focus on art and culture only from the point of view of memorizing certain facts. But if you get the essence, then believe me, the study of art and culture becomes quite interesting for you. Talking about art and culture, let us first start with syllabus. What does UPSC specify with respect to art and culture? So we find that in prelims, the questions asked are mostly direct, based on performing and non-performing arts. Also, we find that many a times in prelims, questions are based on contemporary developments. So one point which no one tells you to prepare in art and culture is current affairs. I would tell you a simple suggestion that The Hindu comes up with a dedicated section on every Friday. Kindly read that. And whenever you find an article with respect to ancient history, medieval history or art and culture, please make a note of that. So we also find regular articles. I'm not telling you to run after multiple textbooks, but if you are able to do this, the art and culture dedicated segment on every Friday and the regular articles, this is something that you have to screen and do it. So we have seen that, for example, in only this year, 2021, a question was asked with respect to Dholavira. And all of us know that Dholavira was included in the UNESCO World Heritage Site lists. So similarly, we get numerous questions. A question was asked, where was the Jan Gan Man of Rabindranath Tagore translated into English? So an article had come on that in The Hindu. So at least from last 1.5 years, the moment you have started your preparation, assuming that you start your preparation at least 1 year before the actual prelims examination next year. So if possible for at least 1.5 years before the prelims, try to do this research while also referring to the standard sources. While again it is found that it does not explicitly mention art and culture, but it is mentioned under history of India and Indian national movement. So when we talk about history of India, then definitely we are talking about ancient India, we are talking about medieval India, and no study of any history is possible. Even world wars have their sense of, they have their segment of cultural history. Now talking about mains examination, all of us know that in the mains GS paper 1, it is explicitly mentioned. So definitely you will have to expect at least two questions every year from art forms. And the beauty of these questions, we are going to discuss some of the questions. The beauty of these questions are that they are concept based. You will never get a question which is as factual as discuss or describe or elaborate the salient features of Amravati School of Art. They will not ask this question. But yes, you should have an idea of different features or characteristics of Amravati School of Art and what do we infer from that. So the questions being asked in the recent times from art and culture are concept based and application oriented. Let me give you an example. In 2015 mains examination, when Chennai witnessed ravaging floods and it exposed the poor urban planning, especially the drainage management, a question had been asked how IVC's drainage pattern has influenced and what are the key takeaways with respect to modern urban planning. So you have to understand the, as I always say, that what all were the art forms in ancient times and what can we correlate and how do we find their imprint in the present times also. This is very, very important. A question was asked, on the philosophy of rock cut architecture. So just understand that till now everybody was talking about the features of temple architecture, caves. Now a question is asked on the philosophy. What does the various component of stupa stand for? So these type of questions are being asked, and you have to, while reading any component, even if you tend to miss out a fact or the two, it's okay, it is permissible, but you cannot afford to miss the concept. And whenever you study art and culture, try to correlate it with the times when it has developed. Then you will understand why it has developed in a specific way. So we find that in the GS paper 1, salient aspects of art forms, literature, architecture from ancient to modern times. So even the British era is included. So we talk about the Kali Ghat paintings, we talk about the company style of paintings, we talk about the various types of painting, we find the Palladian style of architecture, we find Neo-Roman style of architecture. So we find that various forms of architecture, sculpture, all this, even in the British times, is expected. And the questions, as I said, are asked sometimes with analytical understanding. So most of the questions, I always tell my students to focus on concept and analysis. Because if your analysis and concepts are intact, then definitely managing facts is never a problem. Now talking about how the course will go, first of all, the first video, which I believe is the most important video in the entire segment, where I have discussed at length about the basic understanding of art, culture, heritage, and what are the determinants of art and culture. What are the factors which has influenced art and culture of a region? For example, we find that in many of the agrarian regions of India, around the month of January and February, there are harvest festivals. Why? Because that is the time of harvesting. We have Baishakhi, we have Onam, we have Makar Sankranti. So for anybody who is not a part of Indian society, Indian culture, that person will focus only on the practices, what happens during Onam, what are the meals they eat. But if you understand the essence, then it will become quite easier for you to understand the practices. So in the first video, I've discussed the art forms, the determinants of art and culture, the government initiatives, what do you mean by heritage, why it is important to preserve ancient Indian heritage, what are the various laws, recent government schemes, everything. So as I always believe that art and culture is not a relic of the past. It is something which is ingrained in our daily life. Even the food we eat, the clothes we wear, everything. The language we speak, the dialect, the words we pronounce, everything is symptomatic of art and culture. And if you understand from this point of view, then your life becomes quite easy. You learn to enjoy the subject. Instead, if you try to just memorize, then your life becomes quite difficult with respect to art and culture. But again, when I say this, you should also not get overwhelmed, or you should not be over enthusiastic so as to cover or read anything under the sun that comes your way. We have to understand that basically we have a limited time frame. Hence, with the available resource that we have, whatever resource you are following, I'll come to the resource later, you have to have the right approach. Then after discussing this in the introductory session, I'll move on to the art forms, where we have performing arts consisting of dance, drama, music, all this theater, martial arts, non-performing arts in the form of literature, painting, and then miscellaneous such as science and technology, miscellaneous such as cinema. So you may find that the number of chapters are quite exhaustive, but why we don't want to leave any stone unturned. We want you to understand the various facets of Indian art and culture so that you have a comprehensive understanding. And let me tell you one thing, that once you start watching the videos, don't make notes in the first instance. Don't do that. In fact, I always say, because I think that you have a rider of watching the video at least thrice. So watch the video once. First view is to develop overall understanding. Second view, this is the most important. This is to develop, to build concepts. So you have to spend the most amount of time, whatever, and also to make notes. If you want to make some running notes, please do make. And the third view, if ever it is required, the third view is only to, you have to be very selective by the time, because you don't have to watch every lecture again and again. So if you have not understood a area or a component, the beauty is that you can always revisit in the third view. And after covering the art forms, we are going to discuss the role between administration, the role of government, and why only the role of government? Why not the role of CSOs, NGOs, and people also? So when we talk about India Pride Project, the discovery of Natasha Idol, then we have to talk about the initiatives being taken by the connoisseurs of art. So we are covering our entire syllabus in these three segments. Introduction and importance. So basically here, as I already said, that we are going to give an overview of the art and culture. We will explain what is the meaning of art, what is the meaning of culture, how they are related, and how art and culture constitute what is known as Indian heritage, why there is a need to revisit and also preserve Indian heritage. We have to understand the determinants of art and culture, philosophy of art and culture. This is something that we have to understand. And again, the importance of protecting cultural heritage, the threats to them, the government interventions, schemes, laws, and also something that is become a common currency, cultural diplomacy. So what do we mean by cultural diplomacy? We do have to understand what is cultural diplomacy when I talk about Project Monsoon. So we have to understand the various components. It is not about studying few chapters, memorizing the art forms, and then understanding or trying to answer questions on whatever basis, mock tests or actual UPSC examination. No, it is about having a holistic understanding. Just see a question which was being asked in 2018. Safeguarding the ancient Indian heritage is the need of the moment. So without knowing anything about ancient Indian heritage, let me just explain the meaning of heritage. Heritage is something that we inherit. We inherit from past. So when I talk here, we are not talking about individual heritage. We are talking about community-centric heritage, such as buildings, temples, architecture, sculpture, languages also. So many a times we find that certain dialects are declining because people don't speak. I come from Bihar, and I find that people from the Darbhanga region who have settled in Delhi, the Darbhangia dialect, or people from Madhubani do not speak the Madhubani dialect. That is a matter of threat, because art is basically what links the present with the past. And the threat is not only because of the poor usage or the declining popularity, especially when we talk about the dominance of English, when the proclivity is towards adopting more and more of English to the neglect of our regional vernacular languages, then we also have to understand why we have to preserve them, why we need to preserve the art heritage of our past. And in this question, when we talk about safeguarding the ancient Indian heritage, we have to understand the importance of heritage. What is the basic importance of art heritage? Basically, we can say that art heritage or heritages introduces us to our glorious past. And not only it introduces us to our glorious past, but also it gives self-confidence. Self-confidence to uphold, to protect, while also incorporating or imbibing the best from all other cultures. This is what is known as cultural syncretism. Cultural syncretism of India means the ability of India to act like a sponge, drawing up all the good things from different cultures while also contributing to their richness. So this is what India stands for. And when we understand the cultural syncretism, this strengthens Indian diversity. India's diversity, this strengthens India's secularism. This is something that we have to understand with respect to ancient Indian heritage. And heritage is also understanding because this connects us to our roots. So in the first segment of the answer, I expect you to write something on this. Second, need of the moment, we will have to talk about various threats. This is the second part of the answer. Threats to Indian heritage. Various tangible threat, when we find pilferage, stealing sculptural forms, when we find there is, because of increasing tourism, there is an increasing footprint and threat to our architectural structures. and threat also because of negligence of the newer generation to the ancient art forms, cultural forms. So that is the need of the moment. So we have to connect point 1 and point 2. And at the end, in this question, you have to talk about the initiatives. You have to just briefly discuss the initiatives by Government of India, the NGOs, self-help groups, CSOs, etc. This is what your answer would be like, because it is only a 10 marker question. So you just see that if you don't understand why we are studying art and culture, you will never be able to answer this question. Art forms. So discussing art forms, when we talk about performing arts, then here we have the role of an artist. An artist who is trained. So we have trained artists, and sometimes the artists, they also inherit the art forms from family tradition and also from the community where they belong. So when we talk about trained, we are talking about actually classical art forms. When we are talking about something which is inherited, then we are talking about folk art forms. We also have to differentiate between classical and folk arts, classical music, classical dance, folk dance, and then paintings also. So we do have to study the performing arts, and let me again tell you, we have a standard list of performing arts that is generally covered in most of the textbooks. The book which we are going to suggest, Art and Culture by Nitin Singhania, is more than sufficient. But besides this, current affairs, for example, if a martial art is in news, you should do some research on it, because we expect largely a question to be asked from this segment. Now, talking about art forms, we have to study dance forms, in which we have classical dances, which are eight classical dances. And why they are called as classical dances? We call something as classical when it sets a standard frame of reference to be compared with others. So this is a standard. For example, we have a 10 kilo weight. Now when you want to weigh something, you put it or you compare it with the standard 10 kilo weight. Classical dances are also something which is recognized by distinguished government bodies like Sangeet Natak Academy. So those art forms, performing arts, which are recognized, and once recognized, they receive considerable government support for their preservation. It is said that the classical dance forms are derived from Bharat Muni Natya Shastra. Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra is a very important book from which the classical dance forms, musics have originated. And here also we will try to connect the dances with belief system and to an extent society. When I say belief system, I am not only talking about religion, but I am also talking about their overall understanding. For example, in those societies where Devadasi system existed, we can definitely conclude that it was highly patriarchal. So understand the art forms from the perspective of belief system, their patronage, the time in which they developed, and also how we can relate it with the society. Now, we also have folk dances, which are again hundreds in number. And what is the beauty of the folk dances or folk culture is that it talks about local culture, local regional cultures, which generally are given less importance in the ancient and medieval historical accounts. So if we have to talk about the common people, then the folk culture, it is a mirror to the life of commoners. And we find that in the recent times, many of the artists from the folk culture, they are declining because of the declining, I would say, interest of the present generation. So there is a need to revive, there is a very important need to revive folk culture, not only through grants, but by also increasing awareness. So you as future potent bureaucrats also need to appreciate the value of these folk cultures, which may not have an intrinsic materialistic value, but definitely it also adds various hues to the Indian culture, to the Indian way of life. Now, moving from dance, we are going to discuss music. Something which is pleasant to the human ear is music. And here also we will differentiate between classical music, which we will again differentiate between Hindustani and Carnatic, North India, South India, and hundreds of folk music. Now let me tell you, beforehand, when you prepare folk dance, folk culture, folk painting, the list is very long. So apart from the standard list, which we are going to discuss, the standard means the very famous ones, you also have to keep a track of current affairs. those which are in news. For example, few years back a question was asked on the Manganiyars community, a group of bards, a group of singers who used to tell folk tales in Rajasthan. So because Manganiyar community was in news, hence it was expected from the aspirant to be well versed with it. So I always believe that please keep a track of art and culture with respect to especially the names of tribes, the names of local languages, paintings, and sometimes we find certain festivals also. So names of tribes, local paintings, and why only tribes? Important communities. We find their food, especially those who have been included in GI tag list, food or products, whatever be the case. Their festivals, very important. Study of festivals, that which is in news. So please try to prepare folk culture from these aspects. Now talking about music, as I said that classical music is divided into two halves. North India, Hindustani. Why Hindustani? Because we find there is also an influence of Persian. North India, which was under the direct control of Delhi Sultanate. Here we find an infusion of indigenous and Persian music, Hindustani. We will have to understand Kathak dance from the perspective of Hindustani music, and then Carnatic associated with Dravidian culture, which is more pure. And when I say pure, I mean there is no external influence. We have to understand the difference between the two. If Carnatic music is more devotional, here we find that there is an element of ecstasy. And no study of music is complete without the study of musical instruments. Here also, we will not only discuss standard instruments, but we will understand how in the present times when we talk about digital instruments, music has entered into a new territory. We are going to come up with a very comprehensive coverage of art forms, and we can be rest assured that having covered all the recordings, the videos, you will have a very holistic understanding. We'll discuss puppetry, what are the various forms, different forms of puppetry, why puppetry is a dying art, and how does puppetry help us to correlate with the local belief system. With the local belief system, how does it help us? Martial arts. Now again we find the inclusion of certain martial arts in Khelo India initiative. In the Khelo India initiative, certain martial arts have been included, but we'll not only discuss only those, we'll be discussing the very important and famous regional martial arts. Cinema, evolution of Indian cinema from silent cinema to motion pictures to colorful cinema and new techniques that have come up. While also discussing about Satyajit Ray and his contribution to Indian cinema. Circus, why circus is a dying art and what must be done to revive circus, but also to prevent inhuman treatment of animals, because after the Supreme Court judgment following a petition by PETA, the animals, the wild animals are no longer available for circus. So what revamp has to be done? What should be the new strategy of circus to maintain its popularity among children? Now let's again see a question. With respect to Manipur Sankirtan, it is a form of group dance, devotional dance. Consider, examine the following statements. It is a song and a dance performance. Absolutely, this is. So you can eliminate this. Cymbals are the only musical instrument used in the performance. No, it is wrong. Because we also have dholak, we have other kartals. So this is wrong. The moment you eliminate, it is performed to narrate the life and deeds of Lord Krishna. Now, if you understand the role of Vaishnavism, how did Vaishnavism come in Northeast and emerged as a popular belief system, you can easily take this. Sankaradev. So here we have to understand the answer is 1 and 3. Another question with respect to a famous posture, Tribhang. Now Tribhang is something that we associate with the dancing pose of Lord Nataraja. Tribhang is something which we also find in various classical dances, especially in Odissi. What is Tribhang? Tribhang is a posture where the body is bent at three portions, one at neck, then at waist, and then at leg, at the knee. So waist, neck, and all are in different directions. This is the Tribhang posture. So this is the Tribhang posture, and answer is A. Again, if you understand this posture while watching the video, we are also adding animated GIFs so that you can actually watch and understand it in a better way. Now, non-performing arts. This is also a very important segment where we'll be discussing about coinage, we'll be discussing about art, architecture, sculpture. So, music is a part of performing arts, but we also find that alongside music and alongside dance, drama, we also have science and technology. So, non-performing arts, where the artist does not have to move the body or does not have to actually create an impression, he can be a silent performer. We have to understand the significance, architecture. Now, architecture is something that we have done very much in detail. The standard formats. We have understood the evolution of architecture. What does architecture mean, or what does architecture help us understand apart from the structural components? We will understand ancient Indian architecture, temple architecture, Indo-Islamic and European architecture, and that also from the perspective of philosophy. From the perspective of Jaina philosophy, Hindu philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, European philosophy, why we don't find a human figure in the Islamic architecture. So because in Islam, depiction of human beings in divine form is considered to be wrong as haram. But we also find that in the Indo-Islamic architecture, there is a blend, because when the Delhi Sultanate was established and they started patronizing art forms, they also included, or it was unconsciously included in the art forms, the existing Hindu art forms. Then we also moved to Mughal art, which is a beautiful assimilation, assemblage of Rajasthani art, of the Mughal art, Persian art. We have to understand art and culture from the perspective of the changes which were happening in those times. When the Britishers came, especially we'll be talking about the British art forms as successors, political successors of the Mughals, they made it a point that in their art forms, an element of power is reflected. And talking about the element of power, now let me explain you something. When we talk about the element of power in architecture, then element of power can be shown through multiple ways. One, the use of costly, or you can say precious, building material. Element of power is also reflected in the size of the structure. Therefore, we find that when the empire was declining, the size of art forms, and not only the size, but degree of ornamentation. Size but degree of ornamentation is something that we also associate with architecture. Evolution of architecture. When you will be reading about Pallava architecture, you will understand that how the temple architecture evolved from the cave mandapa style to ratha to a freestanding. And then when we talk about the Dravida style of architecture, we'll understand that how the Dravida style of architecture also underwent change from the time of Rajsimha style to Imperial Cholas. And then we have Pandyans, we have Provida style, regional style, and then Nayak style of temple architecture in south. So evolution is a very interesting aspect, and when you correlate evolution with politico-socio-economic history, your knowledge or your understanding is complete. And again, as I say, we will be covering most of the important and standard topics and leave it only to you to cover the cultural aspect. So now again, building Kalyan Mandapas was a notable feature of the temple construction in the kingdom. Now Kalyan Mandapa is something which we associate with a distinct structure where the male and female deity union used to happen during the Mahanavami festival. This is something which we associate with Provida style of architecture. Provida style of temple architecture associated with Vijayanagar kingdom. So many a times you find that if you have understood the essence, out of 8 questions, I can tell you for sure that if you have understood 4 to 5 questions are very easy. If you have just watched the videos twice, that is covered. It is only for the next 2 to 3 questions that you have to exert a bit more. But remember, if you are able to cover ancient history, medieval history and art and culture, then definitely you are ahead of many of the other aspirants who might neglect or not prepare it in a proper way. And the best part is that once you have understood the essence, once you have understood the philosophy, you don't have to make any extra effort for your GS paper 1. You can just go revise, pick up the important points and write beautiful answers. Again, just see, with reference to art and archaeological history of India, which among the following was made the earliest? Now, this was a bit trickier question because here you have to understand the chronology. If we talk about the Lingaraj temple of Bhubaneswar, then we have to just know that they were constructed in the post Gupta period by the Ganga rulers. If we talk about the rock-cut elephant at Dhauli, then Mauryan times, Mauryan era. If we talk about monuments at Mahabalipuram, Pallava time, Pallava era. And Varaha image at Udayagiri, then we are talking about Gupta era. So just see, without getting into the dates, we are able to correlate, and now we know the answer is rock-cut elephant at Dhauli and Jugada. So you just have to understand the essence and you are able to, without remembering the dates, you can easily answer. Now see a question, the rock-cut architecture. Now let us understand the question. Rock-cut architecture remains one of the most important sources of knowledge of early Indian art and history. To put this question in a simple word, that is how rock-cut architecture can be a source for study of ancient history. What all can you derive? What are the various takeaways, to put it in a more lame language, from rock-cut architecture? I can tell you, first of all, the size. You have to see the size, number one. The degree of ornamentation. These two are the first way, the first pointers. When you talk about size, then you have to focus on vertical and horizontal expansion. And as the height goes up, as it goes higher, definitely we can see that the element of power or the flourishing empire which is its patronage is also reflected. And when we talk about high ornamentation, we can also understand that how it would have implied, the state would have implied larger number of craftsmen. Now, not only the degree of ornamentation, but the nature also, what all images are there. So we find that in many of the temple walls, we have depiction of scenes from the epics. We have erotic images also, which is giving a sense of influence of Tantricism, and also giving a sense of completion that when you have entered a temple premises, you have also conquered over the sexual desires. When we talk about Buddhist architecture, Buddhist stupa, when we find that on the anda, on the hemispherical dome, are engraved images of the Jataka tales, so that when you perform the Pradakshina Path, the Parikrama, you are enlightened and educated about it. In the Toran Dwar, we find the images of Yaksh and Yakshini, which helps us to understand that how the later Buddhist structures were an integration of Buddhist beliefs and also folk beliefs. So the nature of ornamentation helps us to understand a lot deal. It is not only about the beautification, the high skillfulness or the resourcefulness of the state, which has employed people in large number, but also the belief system. So belief system is also something which is very important to understand. When we talk about belief system, for example, if there is a Shiva prominence, if there is a predominance of Shiva temples, then definitely the state rulers patronize Shaivism. So belief system of the state, not of the common people. Again, there is a limitation. In this question, you have to say that the rock-cut architecture only tells us about the powerful class, the patrons, and also the Brahmins. It does not help us to understand the history of common people. It does not help us to understand that. That is the limitation, I would say. The structure, when we talk about the structure, for example, when we talk about Himadri Pandit, who patronized the temple architecture, and here in the temple architecture, such as the rock-cut architecture, find the Hoyshalas, we find about Himadri Pandit, then we find that we have heavy structures. Now, heavy structures with minimum ornamentation means that more emphasis was on preserving the structure and there was a threat of invasion. That is also. So, when we talk about rock-cut architecture, why not also to discuss about the citadel of Indus Valley civilization, where we find emphasis is also on disaster management, flood management. When we find the granaries gives us an ample view of agricultural surplus, how they are effectively managing. The rock-cut architecture of Indus Valley civilization, when we talk about rock-cut architecture, we also talk about their drains. So in these type of questions, the number of dimensions you are able to explore, and this can come only with comprehensive understanding. Because this question appears to be very generalistic, but for somebody who has not correlated or studied might get entangled in only one form of architecture. So here, why not also to discuss something about Indo-Islamic architecture? How we find that during Qutbuddin Aibak, some of the mosques were nothing but reconstructed models of destroyed temples. So please understand that architecture, sculpture, dance forms, everything has to be studied in consonance with belief system, political happenings, economic development, and the formation of society. But the only limitation, which I always say, that whenever you refer to any form of historical source, also briefly refer to the limitation of that art form. How it only gives not a complete picture, it gives only a partial picture, or I would say a majority of the picture. Though in this question, you have to write about Buddhist architecture briefly, Jaina architecture, temple architecture means you have to discuss, and also secular architecture you can discuss about this. Again, this is a 10 marker question, and the problem with 10 marker question is that you don't have the bandwidth of writing so much. So other way is that you can focus on disaster management, utility driven approach, belief system. You can talk about the economic resourcefulness, all this, and then give or cite common examples. Now talking about sculpture, first of all understand what is a sculpture. A statue is an example of sculpture, and also something that is sculpted, engraved on the wall is an example of sculpture. A metallic idol is an example of sculpture. This can also be. So we will discuss the evolution of sculptures, and also not only the evolution but various techniques. How some of the techniques, we are going to discuss the lost wax method which exists even today. Not only the evolution, various techniques, but also the different materials being used. Different materials being used. We have to understand this. The shape, size, nature, secular, Kanishk headless statue. What do they want to say? Belief system. So talking about the Kushanas who believed in divine kingship theory, they erected their statues claiming them as sons of gods. We have the images of kings and queens in the Chola temples to commemorate their victories. So sculptures also tell us about the belief system of the patrons. What is the meaning of, what is the symbolism of bull, a horse, an elephant in Buddhism? We have to understand this. Why a humped bull is worshipped as not only a very sacred animal because of the Shaivite belief system, but humped bull is also a sign of fertility, a prosperity, because in ancient Indian agriculture, the plow was operated with the help of humped bull. So that is also one of the reasons why in ancient India, we did not have a slave system, a slavery mode of production as stringent or as harsh as in the West, because in the West there was no humped bull. So in West, when you study feudalism in your world history, you will find that there was a more exploitative form of manual labor known as serfdom. In India, we do not have serfdom. So when you correlate sculpture or any art form with history, then you will have a comprehensive understanding. And then you will also be able to correlate it with the present times. How the Shudra, the gods of Shudra have been largely neglected. But still, in Buddhism, which has given an open gateway, they have integrated. Megasthenes talks about Yaksh and Yakshini. We have discovered various Yaksh, Yakshini, Naga images from the Mathura Patna region we have discovered. So we find that the study of sculpture, which we definitely will follow a chronological pattern from Harappan times, where we have terracotta images, where we have bronze statues, but again bronze was a more difficult and a costly alloy. Hence probably it also tells us about the existing social stratification. When we talk about the Chalcolithic, that is the Copper Age, we find that in the Chalcolithic burials, the nature of the burial goods tells us about the existing social stratification. When we will be discussing the ancient Indian history of the Chalcolithic society, we will see the distribution of houses, the size of houses, the shape of houses also tells us about the socio-economic hierarchy. Then the sculptures of Mauryan period. Here we will be discussing not only about the state art, court art, but also popular art. Then Gandhara, Mathura, Amravati, and later the Banaras school of art, the prominent art, where we find that we have distinct Greek and Roman influence. And then the sculptures as a part of architecture also in the temple walls, Rashtrakuta, Chalukyas of Badami, Eastern Gangas, Hoysalas, and Vijayanagar, Yali Stamba. So we understand how sculpture has evolved and developed, and it reflects an independent school of non-performing arts. So just see what the question, in fact, there has been two questions which has been asked in the same context. The Central Asian and Greco-Bactrian elements in Gandhara school of art. For example, when you find the depiction of Buddha in Gandhara school, then we find that there is more emphasis on physical beauty. So it was a Western culture, physical beauty on masculinity. The Buddha appears to be very strong, whereas you talk about the Mathura school of art, Amravati school of art, where more emphasis is on spiritual serenity. So this is the basic difference. And when you understand the basic difference, that more emphasis is on physical beauty, on masculinity, then you have to write what were the different elements of beautification, who all were sculpted. We know that the Bamia images have been destroyed by Taliban. It was in news. So we have to focus on the features, but before that we have to understand the mindset of those who patronized. When we talk about the Greco-Bactrian elements, we also have to talk about the influence of the Greeks. We find that Buddha resembled like the Greek gods, Apollo. Then not only the image of Buddha, but Bodhisattvas were also there, curly hair. And then the influence of Romans. We find Janus, Tritons, cherubs. All this which we find in the Roman sculpture was also depicted. How Buddha's mother, she is depicted very close to the female deities of the Greco mythology. So the influence of Greek mythology, in fact the very term mythology is something which the tradition of writing or compiling mythology is something which existed in the Greek world. Now we don't know whether India borrowed it from there or it was also an indigenous development in India, but definitely we find some parallels. So when you discuss, when you understand the question in perspective of the background, then your answer becomes multifaceted, multidimensional. Otherwise, generally what I find is that in these type of questions, people just write the features of Gandhara school of art. That is not what is expected from you to write, because that is something that everyone will write, but that is not the demand of the question. The demand of the question is Central Asian and Greco-Bactrian element, and in that you have to start from their belief system. Now talking about paintings, it is said that paintings were one of the earliest forms of non-performing arts. We have prehistoric paintings. We have influence of prehistoric paintings where we will be discussing about the famous World Heritage Site Mesolithic paintings of Bhimbetka. And the beauty of the Mesolithic paintings or many painting is that many times the contemporary themes, the societal themes are depicted in these paintings. So the study of painting is basically a study of the society. Even if it does not actually reflect, but it is in many ways a reflection. And also a belief system. When we talk about Kali Ghat paintings, when we talk about Madhubani art where the themes are from epics. But again, when I talk about the bazaar style of painting, when I discuss about the Mughal paintings, we find that besides the element of creativity, they have also emphasized various contemporary themes such as court scenes, the postures of the rulers on various occasions. So the study of painting, besides its technique, we'll also see how the technique have changed, the painting material, the painting brush, and also how various techniques with reference to emphasis on depth, foreshadowing. We'll see that. The use of charcoal pencil from the time of Shah Jahan. We'll discuss about Indo-Saracenic style. So Harappan painting tradition. And how did the early humans who did not have a concept of developing paint material obtained their colors from the minerals? Red soil, hematite, we have predominant use of red color. So the painting material, it tells us about the geography. The painting material also tells us, if not from geography, what is the influence. For example, the Persians were fond of blue color. So with the advent of Delhi Sultanate, we find that predominantly blue color was also shown. We find that in the Karnataka region, there is an emphasis on gold color because of the fascination with gold. So we find that all this, and then the great wall paintings, murals and fresco, Ajanta, Ellora, Sultanate and Mughal paintings, regional schools and folk paintings. So we'll not be only be covering standard sources but also folk paintings, especially those paintings which have been in news. Again, as I say, folk art, it is not possible to cover everything, but we'll be covering folk paintings, Madhubani paintings, Manjusha School of Art, Bhagalpur, Kali Ghat, Kalamkari School of Painting, Varli School of Art. So we will be doing Patachitra, Phad paintings, various painting materials, how the Phad paintings was used by the bards to transmit, to disseminate the information, the knowledge of epics when they traveled from village to village. So how paintings were also a means to propagate a message, the historicity, the evolution of paintings. So again, the paintings of Bodhisattva Padmapani, Compassion, is one of the most famous and illustrated paintings at Ajanta. Again, if you Google Ajanta paintings, the painting which comes of a Bodhisattva Padmapani. Padmapani is a symbolism of Buddha's compassion. So we will understand the various important bodhisattvas also. Literature. One of the things that differentiates the humans from all other living beings is our ability to express not only through sounds and actions but also through a written script. We'll understand the evolution of script. Script is something that we write and language is something that we speak. And language plus script constitute what is known as literature. So evolution of Harappan script, Vedic literature from Shruti format, earlier it was preserved in oral format, to Smriti format, Smriti form of literature. We have to understand. And also there was an evolution of Sanskrit, the root languages from which various other languages have evolved. When we talk about script, we'll also do the evolution of script, how various scripts have emerged. Sangam literature, another very important corpus, Buddhist and Jaina literature. So Buddhist and Jaina texts were not only a source of study of Buddhist and Jaina belief system, but they also helps us to understand the existing political socio-economic structure. Important ancient texts, medieval texts, not only their authorship, but what information can we derive from them. Foreign travelers' accounts, very important. Why? Because foreign travelers, they first of all speak from a neutral perspective, because we find that if any poet is there or a historian is there who is patronized by the state, say in Akbar's court, definitely that person will have a favorable disposition towards the patron. That person will write more and there is an element of exaggeration, eulogy in the court accounts. But when we talk about foreign literary accounts, unlike the court accounts which focus upon the ruling class, upon the state, first of all, they give a neutral view. And even if there is an element of influence, especially when we talk about Huyen Sang Fa Hen, but what we find is that because they used to travel, they have also given a general observation of common people. So they have also highlighted the common life. But again, there is a catch. The catch is that because the foreign travelers does not understand the language, so many a times they had their translators and they may have interpreted based on whatever translation was offered to them. So the foreign travelers account is mainly based on what we say as hearsay or kaha suni. So the data which is given by them, the information which is given by them may have to be, you have to corroborate with the help of other accounts. For example, Megasthenes says that there is no slavery in India. Maybe because he found that the institution of slavery was very exploitative in the Greek world. And in India, there was no such inhuman treatment. So again, as I said, slavery did not exist in India because we had ways of getting things done without exploiting human labor. So you have to understand the limitation also. When we talk about Bhakti Sufi movement, we have to understand how Bhakti Sufi movement, especially Bhakti, contributed to the growth of regional literature. So always focus on these aspects, interlinkages, how the assemblage of Bhakti and Sufi gave rise to a language known as Hindavi. And then we had the origin of Urdu, something that was not there in Central Asia. What is the Hindu-Urdu controversy? Something that you will read in your modern India. How Urdu reached its zenith in 18th century at a time when India was witnessing its political decline. What was the dichotomy about? So we have to understand the evolution of literature not only in terms of books, their authors, but also in terms of the evolutionary aspect as well. Now a question was asked this year. that with reference to the history of ancient India, Bhavabhuti, Hastimala and Shemeshwara, who were they? They were famous writers. They used to write dramatic works. Chinese traveler Huan Sang, who visited India to record the general conditions, he had come to India to procure the Buddhist texts. So, which of the following statements are correct with respect to whatever he has said? The roads and river routes were completely immune from robbery. Now, again, this is something which we have to infer from the very important and interesting piece of insight is that Huan Sang was robbed twice during his stay in India. So that definitely means that first is wrong. And then you can see without even reading the two options, because I know this important piece of anecdote or information, I can get it right. But again, let's see. What does the second statement say? As regards punishment for offences, ordeals by fire, water and poison were used for determining guilty and innocence. Yes, he talks about the elaborate judicial system of Harshavardhan. The tradesmen had to pay duties at various occasions. He also talks about the taxation. But again, as you can see, even without having a specific information, if you know the overall structure, you know the important anecdotes, then definitely you can get through the right answer. Persian literary traditions, sources of medieval India reflect the spirit of the age. Now, this is a very, I would say, direct question, to be honest. Here we have to understand the development of Persian literature. When we talk about Persian literature, first of all, we have to talk about court historians and their accounts. Minhaj Siraj, we have to talk about El-Biruni, court historians, Abul Fazl. And development of Persian literature, we also have to talk about Amir Khusro, who was not only a historian but also a poet. The works of Amir Khusro. And various forms of Persian literature. We have to talk about Sufi literature. The historical project Akbar Nama. And then we have to talk about Malfuz. Malfuz under Sufi literature, Akbarat, who all wrote. And again, you don't have to get into all the examples. If you are able to break up during what period, what was the time, what was the motive of writing the important works. For example, El-Biruni has presented a critical account of Indian society, but has also praised the Indian knowledge of philosophy and science, especially with respect to mathematics and astronomy. So when we understand El-Biruni, who went on to the extent of studying Sanskrit so as to very accurately interpret the Sanskrit texts, we have to understand his purpose. But when we talk about Minhaj Siraj, we have to understand the purpose of Minhaj Siraj was to write or compile history of his patrons. So definitely in Minhaj Siraj's account, the inclination will be more favorable towards the state than an El-Biruni's account. When we talk about Abul Fazl, it's natural that Abul Fazl will be all praises. But on the other hand, if we talk about Badayuni, who was a conservative Sufi follower, he was critical of Akbar's rule and his policies. So it is famously said that where you stand reflects your stand. So you have to understand the nature of the patron and the author to understand the theme or the purpose of any work. That is how you have to do. Now, there are miscellaneous art forms also, which we will be covering apart from the standard ones which we have discussed, such as coinage, the evolution of coinage, various forms of minting coins, various sources of coins in India, and when there was decline of coinage, how did we manage exchange? Was it only barter system? And the coinage material, especially India, a country which does not have silver mines, we don't have, apart from silver which is obtained as a byproduct of smelting of some of the metals in Rajasthan. Gold also is not available in plenty. Despite this, why India was known as Sone ki Chidiya? This has to do largely with the inflow of gold during the favorable Indo-Roman trade. So we'll understand numismatics as the study of mainly, I would say, economic history. We have to understand it from the perspective of economic history. But again, if you look at some of the coins, for example, if you look at the coins of Kushanas, they have depicted the Greek gods, Persian gods, and also the Brahmanical gods. So probably this tells us that they wanted to patronize and to win over the support of people from diverse sections. But then when we talk about the Islamic coins, then we also have to understand their belief system, in which the practice of depicting the image of gods and goddesses was stopped. And instead we had what we know as arabesque technique or kalimas were there. So the study of coinage has to be understood also in perspective of the belief system. Handicrafts. Speaking of handicrafts, that is something that is crafted by an artist in the form of a product. Can be an example of handicrafts reveal the aesthetic sense of the consumers. Especially in India, where tourism is developing as a sunrise industry, we find that handicraft has a huge potential to attract tourism and also to create what is known as the impact of Indian culture all over the world. When we talk about cultural diplomacy, when we talk about putting India onto the global footprint, definitely the role of handicrafts has to be understood not only in terms of the characteristics, but also in terms of its potential to popularize the Indian culture all over the world. That is important. We find that every year in current affairs also you come across various craft goods given GI tags, geographical indication tag. Let me tell you what is the meaning of GI tag, which I have been using more frequently. Geographical indication tag means that a particular product is sourced only or made at a particular location. So Darjeeling tea, even if the same quality of tea can be grown in any other part of India, cannot be sold as Darjeeling tea. So the purpose of GI tag is to preserve the art, to preserve the craft, and also the sense of uniqueness which attracts, that is the USP of a locality. Now in handicrafts, we are going to discuss the various forms of crafts in terms of the usage of materials, in terms of the nature of community. So handicrafts is not only about the product, it is also about the community. So you learn about the community also. So we find that many of the PVTs, the vulnerable tribes, produce these handicrafts, various tribes. Recently, Prime Minister Modi ji spoke about promoting indigenous toys, Channapatna toys. Why? Because China has been dumping its sophisticated and simplistic plastic toys, which are also has an ecological and a health hazard. So the need to promote indigenous toys is also from the point of view of economics footprint and also its impact on the psychology of the next generation. For example, if you consume more and more of indigenous toys, then you develop a liking with the local culture. So that is the psychology behind popularizing, and also with the sense of giving more employment opportunities, with the sense of promoting a sense of self-employment, income generation among various groups which have otherwise been ignored. So when you study handicrafts, and especially it is not about studying when you visit a particular place in India, then try to explore the handicrafts. Then you will learn a lot about the communities, how did it evolve, what is the historicity of the handicrafts, why they use a particular material, what is the geographical connection. For example, in certain parts of India where copper and tin is there, we find that increased production of bronze toys or bronze statues are there. We talk about the use of various printing material, writing material, especially in Northeast. Many of them are in news. So please keep us track of the current affairs, the current developments, while also preparing and doing everything from our standard source. Art forms miscellaneous, we'll be talking about the sports tradition in India. Fairs and festivals. Correlate festivals with the society and also the belief system. And festivals will also correlate festivals with various performing arts, such as martial arts, such as theaters, dance, music, martial arts, and theaters. So let us try to correlate all of them. Fairs. What was the significance of fairs? For example, in Swadeshi movement, you read about jatras in Bengal as a special instrument for mobilizing people. Gajpati festival and Shivaji festival by Bal Gangadhar Tilak. So fairs and festivals also have a very important aspect of mass mobilization. Then scientific developments. It is said that India once was the cradle of development of science and technology. When we talk about the prominent universities, Nalanda, Odantapuri, Vikramshila, and definitely Takshila. When we talk about all these universities, we have to understand the contribution of India. how India was once a place where people used to come, like today people talk about Ivy League in US. How India was once a prominent center of learning all over the world. And if you appreciate this, you will understand the roots and what has to be done to revive. If it is not possible to resurrect it to its original glory, to its original shape, definitely we can learn a lot. Pick up the strands, and we know that already Nalanda University is being redeveloped following the passage of Nalanda University Bill in 2010. So we have to understand art forms from the perspective of the reviving, the need to revive the glory and understanding of ancient times. And then the important segment of governance, the role of government to promote, to preserve the art forms, which are the concerned government authorities, Ministry of Culture, which are the government sanctioned institutions, important government organizations, schemes and acts. So when you have to talk about what has been done, we'll be also talking about DPSPs, what the state ought to do, and fundamental duties, the role of citizen also in preserving the art forms. Then you have a comprehensive view of art and culture. If you talk about the prelims trends, the number of questions being asked in prelims over the years, we can say that roughly, mostly we find that on the higher ground as many as 10 questions. But in the recent times where we find that 5 to 6 questions are asked, it is not because art and culture is not given importance, because the space has been taken by art and culture in consonance with ancient India and medieval India. So overall 10 questions will be asked. Sometimes they will ask questions in which ancient India and medieval India is more, whereas the leftover space is by art and culture. So you should expect roughly 6 to 7 questions and overall 10 to 12 questions from the cumulative ancient, medieval and art and culture. Mains also, we find that the number of questions being asked in art and culture has been on the rise. So earlier if 1 or 2 questions were asked, nowadays we find as many as 4 questions are asked. So you can just imagine the importance of preparing art and culture on a conceptual note in the mains examination. Sources to refer. Again, as I say, BYJU'S study material, the tablet and the running notes should be your primary source. Newspapers, The Hindu. Sometimes you can also refer to the explained page of Indian Express if it has something. India's yearbook, a chapter is there on Ministry of Culture. Please refer to that if you have any doubt with reference to governance. And after you are done with this, you can just refer to Nitin Singhania's Art and Culture notes or the textbook to see if you have missed out on anything. But I would say that kindly stick to these two. Some of the students also ask about NCERT. You can read the new NCERT, Class 11, An Introduction to Art and Culture. You can read this book. That's a good book. A very thin book. It will not take more than a week for you to complete it. But after you have done with BYJU'S tablet study material, then this becomes a cakewalk for you. Now talking about art and culture, I have already discussed at length. I would say you just divide art and culture into performing arts, non-performing arts, and before that you should start with the basics. So first view, as I already said, that in the first view, first of all, basic understanding has to be developed. And if possible, I would suggest that art and culture should be done after ancient India and medieval India. Do not start it, because otherwise you will not understand the background. So first view, have a basic understanding, overview, no notes preparing has to be done. And the second view has to be the most important view, where you have understood the overall structure, and then make running notes. Then make running notes of whatever you are getting. If you have a PDF of the PPTs, you can make, but at times the PPT PDF can be very voluminous. So just make a running notes, and then after you are done with first and second view, solve questions. Solve questions, integrate with your notes, and keep a track of current affairs. Every week, just read, underline whatever you have in current affairs and make weekly notes. Be regular, and even if you don't want to complete entire art and culture, you divide art and culture into 3-4 segments. One, you have introduction, basic understanding, then performing arts, then non-performing arts, and then miscellaneous. Kindly try to do all these 4 segments one by one. And whenever you have doubt with respect to, say, Pallava architecture, try to go through your ancient India portion to understand who were the Pallavas. Start with this basic question. And then I firmly believe that if you do this iteration for twice or thrice, you will not have any difficulty in covering art and culture and also retaining the analysis, concept, and important facts. It is only when you diversify your resource base that you get confused and you have all but nothing but a gamut of information without a trend. So I hope the video would have helped you to understand the basics, how to approach, what is the framework about, the course is about, and try not to feel overwhelmed if you are introduced to this segment for the first time. Prepare well, study hard. Thank you.